Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the VectoScalar Tech Talk show. In each and every show, we pick up some unique topic, but this time the topic is even more impactful because we are going to talk about impact. We have today Kshitiz Anand, who will be talking about the design and tech for impact. Welcome, Kshitiz, to our show.
Thank you, Vikas.
Thanks again. And for the understanding of our audience, let me give you a brief introduction about Kshitiz Anand. Kshitiz Anand is chairperson of the Happy Horizon Group with business interest in technology and design consulting, education, with building chain of high quality early childhood learning center in tier 3 and 4 cities in India, healthcare, providing better rural healthcare with a focus on non-communicable disease and lifestyle disease through our hospitals in rural Bihar. Previously, he had a design team at Paytm and 1MG. He is also co-founder of Care Kiba Ventures, an investment platform investing in impact-driven startups. He was earlier president of the IIT Guwahati Alumni Association and board member of the Pan IIT Alumni Indian Foundation too. Kshitiz, that's a lot of things that you have done, and I think you have touched different spaces. It's not one space that you have touched upon. So I would like to first of all to help explain to us that what is design, because tech we all understand, right? Every one of us understand the tech, but design is something that different people are having different perception. So can you brief us about on that part?
Sure. So that's a great question to start with, and I think
Yeah.
over the past 2 decades in being a design professional, and then of course we add in about 4 years of undergrad and 2 years of masters in design. It's almost like I spent like close to like 25, 26 years in design, right? And it's kind of very interesting because every few years my understanding of what is design really changes, right? And I think it changes because I see the importance that design brings in to the companies, to organizations, and to the world around us, right? So over the years, what I've realized is by virtue of being, as a graphic designer, user interface designer, somebody who's working in user experiences, somebody who's working in product design. I've had the chance to teach design as well. Also had a chance to, have like design leadership roles. What I've understood is, design really is about, solving the problem in a very human-centric way, wherein you understand the problem in totality, you understand the problem in depth, and try to bring in a perspective of solving the problem with a very human-centric perspective, right? And that can apply to whichever area of design you're looking at, right? And that I think has stuck with me for a longer time now, because that I believe kind of encapsulates everything that we do, no matter the discipline of design that you are in, right? Like you are building a product in technology, you're building a product in, let's say, sustainability, you're building a physical product. At the end of the day, you're trying to solve a problem with a very human centric perspective, right? And that to me I think is the purview of design that I go with in my present understanding. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's the most fundamental definition of design, which is human-centered innovation and human-centered understanding. So the more we are keeping the interest of the users and the people who are going to use it at the center, I think things are going to be much better. Now, talking about the problem, because the theme of this podcast is that design and tech for impact. So how is it that design and tech is solving the problem? Could you give us some example, or how probably you have solved some problems that you are seeing around us?
Sure. So I think like one very interesting quote that I often give, and I like to kind of say it again and again, is when you think about design, right? Probably there's no other discipline that touches a person's life more than design, right? So you can look around you, you can look around your life, whether it's in the product you use, the glasses you wear, the dress you wear, the FMCG products you use, the branding, everywhere, right? There's design everywhere, right? But more so, I've because we come from a tech background, we worked in tech companies, you studied at tech universities. When you bring this amalgamation of technology and design, right, a lot of possibilities emerge. And what I fundamentally believe is when you think about uh, the thing that solves the problems for people, when you understand that really well, and then you say, okay, how can I use technology to solve for that problem? That's where true innovation happens, right? And you can take, for example, the work that that I was part of at, let's say, at Paytm and also at 1mg, and also even before that, right? In my previous organizations, while technology are great because all these are tech companies, but they were all trying to solve a very fundamental human problem, right? If you look at 1mg, for example, right, trying to say how can we democratize healthcare, right? Like online healthcare. It started with medicine delivery, but then it also went into doctor consultations. That was diabetic care plans, and a bunch of other things around that, right? If you look at Paytm, just this ability of doing financial transactions in a digital manner, right? Like the whole digital manner. It started with something as fundamental as that, but then eventually evolved to understanding so many other facets of a user, the problems that they face, and then trying to solve for those, right? And I think when you start to understand human behavior, because when you introduce new technology to people, there is a new acquired behavior that people have, right? For example, everybody now uses probably UPI, right? And that's an acquired behavior for a lot of people now. But then now UPI is resulting in probably some new problems, right? And that's the evolutionary nature of things, where when you bring in a new innovation with technology, there will always be a new set of behavior emerge, and those new set of behaviors will probably result in some new problems, right? And then that's where another set of innovation happens, and that's that cycle that keeps continuing on and on, right? And what I fundamentally believe is, as a company, right, who is basically using technology to create impact, one has to be very mindful about this aspect, that when we introduce a certain technology to a certain audience, what is the behavioral level changes that are happening in that audience? Because when you understand the behavioral level changes happening, you can innovate on top of that, right? So
Okay.
we all know how traditional banking was, right? And traditional banking was this very cumbersome process. But here comes the fintech companies, and they kind of transform traditional banking, right? Because not everybody goes to banking with like demands of, or like requirements of, huge amount of money. People have small requirements, right? The savings bank account sizes are small, the financial transaction sizes are small, and you probably don't need a full-fledged bank to give you all those services, right? So innovation happens, and I think that's the cycle. If we are aware about these possibilities that technology can bring, and this is the case, you can look at any domain, right? Fintech, healthcare, education, retail, commerce, any you look at, I think technology can bring in that innovation. And when you understand human behavior, I think there's a substantial impact that gets created in people's life as well.
Okay. That explains a lot about that, how problems are being solved through the adoption of design. But to take this discussion further, and probably to get to the root of this discussion in a manner, that how did you start into design? Like you said that you are having a more than 25, close to 25 years of experience in design. So did you study design at your graduation, post graduation level, or it was a different journey?
Yeah, so I actually, it's kind of very interesting because growing up in the 90s as a, like a teenager, preparing for your JEE exams, I think everybody wanted to become a computer science engineer because, we're talking about the time of the Y2K where, people were just thinking about what the possible technology. Internet was not as big as you think it is today. We still were, on dial-up connections, and it used to take a lot of time to do things, but everybody wanted to become a computer engineer, right? So everybody, like every aspiring teenager who was preparing for, let's say, JE, they would aspire to, let's say, get into a computer science program, right? But it just so happened that like I landed up in the undergrad design program at IIT Guwahati, and without knowing anything about design, right? Because no one planned for that, right? But then since I was
And
there,
also, if I can interrupt, like nowadays we are still aware about design to some extent, but back in those days, if I remember, I think that's the same time when I was doing my graduation. I think I was not even aware of there is something like this. If somebody would have
yes,
said that I'm into designing, my only thing will be either it is website designing or probably some fashion designing. I think
fashion
those were
design.
the two design that I was aware of.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Right. So obviously, and I did have my share of, like trying to convince people that I studied design. And to make matters more interesting, because I was studying in Guwahati, because, it was a new IIT. It was just about 6, 7 years that IIT Guwahati was there. So people were like, really questioning if I was really studying a genuine program or not, right? Because not a single batch had graduated out of IT Guwahati, and it was in Guwahati, and so it made things a little bit complicated. But when I think I remember very clearly that after my first semester, I was really hooked onto design, right? Because I felt that this is something which is so fundamental to humanity that the implications of being a designer is far more than what I can imagine, right? And I think over the past 25 years of my being in the designs field, it has impacted me a lot. And I think design as a way of life for me more than just a profession, right? And I think that's where I bring in my entire practice into the picture as well.
Okay, so since beginning, after completing your graduation, you joined the design field, as I understand, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I did my undergrad in design and communication design, and then a master's from the US in human-computer interaction design as well. So I've been all throughout, as a practicing designer in the design field itself.
Okay. And during this journey, what is that one big impact that you have seen, probably through your organization or somebody else, that has inspired you the most, that has kept you into this field of design, which inspires most about the design? Any one or two example that you like to share with us?
Yeah, I think my work at Paytm I was really inspired by, right? Because when I joined, we were probably, if you look at the merchant ecosystem in India, it's very unorganized, right? And I
Yeah.
was heading the design team at the merchant ecosystem in Paytm, and that was where I truly understood the impact that your design could create on the number of people that it could impact. Right? If you talk about volume of impact, the number of people who are using your products on a daily basis, the number of people who eventually ended up, you becoming a part of the merchant ecosystem, that you used to call, that was really powerful, right? I think for the almost like 3.5 years that I was there at Paytm, my entire journey of working in the merchant ecosystem, I spent my most amount of time in that ecosystem because that was something which was very interesting. It was growing in India, like merchant lending, merchant preferences, merchant education, educating merchants. Because when you think about merchants, you're talking about a pani puri vendor to a large merchant like, let's say, Uber, right? So you're talking both of them merchants to you. Now imagine the amount of diversity in the user profiling, the diversity in terms of behavior, the diversity in terms of the comfort level with technology that each of these users had, right? So that made it very interesting to see how you can design products for various kinds of merchants, different kind of products, and see the impact that it eventually had on a lot of people as well.
Okay. I'm a big fan of Paytm. Like when the Paytm bank got banned and they could not provide is there any lag? I think there was some lag in between. Yeah. So I was talking about, yeah, am I audible?
Yes. Go ahead. Huh.
Okay. Yeah. So I was saying that when the Paytm thing was banned, Paytm Bank, I could not access Paytm Wallet for some time, and it was a difficult time for me in a way that I tried using alternatives, but I was not accepting. So somehow my user design, the way my interaction has happened, that was well accepted with the Paytm kind of work. So I would like to understand, would you like to share any specific example? Because most of the people who are watching these shows are coming from the entrepreneurial background or they are the technical engineers, right? So what is that unique aspect? So would you like to share any one example that how you solved something differently? Like earlier it used to happen in some other manner at Paytm, and then you introduce some other feature, or you found something which changed the way things were working. Any specific example?
Yeah, I think if you just take a simple example, right? Let's say access to capital, right? If you talk about access to capital that merchants have, we all know that banks are mostly favoring people who have good credit scores, people who have, let's say, big requirements. They will come for bigger loans. But if you look at
Yeah.
the numbers, there's a substantial number of people in the country who probably need loans like 20,000, 50,000, like very small amount of loans, right? So this became a very interesting problem to solve for us because you had merchant data in terms of people were able to, based on the transactions, you could understand the merchant in terms of their, how much they earned, how much they kind of, what are the transactions like. And you could then, do some data modeling on that and then decide the credit worthiness of the merchants, right? And I think the whole process of actually applying for a loan, right, for the merchants became such an easy process for people, right? I think a lot of merchants I remember uh, who then became very loyal customers because of that one particular feature that we ended up building, right? And how do you really get them to start believing in it? And then obviously because you have the entire ecosystem around that, you can give them a lot of other services as well. So one, of course, onboarding merchants to believe in your system, give them the value of the different products, simple products like a QR code to facilitate transaction, Soundbox, I think all of us are familiar with.
Yeah.
Also, your for a lot of merchants, even just getting lending access to capital, and also things like how do you make a merchant feel that they are in charge of their financial transactions, right? So those kind of things we enabled them. I think that was very interesting, and I think one of the most rewarding experience that I've had in my career as well.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for sharing that part. Now, from the engineering perspective, from the product building perspective, I think there are two scenarios. One, where there are only engineers, there are only developers who are building the product and are behind that system, and for some reason they are not getting some design person on board. So, what are your experiences based into the industry? That what are the reasons that people don't onboard the design people, design engineers, and what is the importance as per you?
See, I think, and again, I could probably have a lot of people who don't agree to this, but I just feel that people probably don't understand the true value that design brings in, right? And when you talk about the value of design, like it's the same question that you asked in the beginning: what is design, right?
Yeah.
Asking somebody what is the value of design, uh, if the top leadership in an organization understands the value of design, they will invest in design. If they don't understand the value of design, for them design is just another function and that can be done by anybody. They will probably be okay with, even let's say, product managers do design. I know a lot of companies where product managers do design. They don't even need designers. Product management reports into design as well, right? So the question comes, what is the real value of design, right? And it's multifold, right? The value of design does not mean just about creating beautiful interfaces. And that's the most commonly accepted understanding of design, that hey, designers need to create good interfaces. But then today, if you ask me, there are a lot of AI tools that can create those beautiful interfaces. So does that mean
Yeah.
you should not have a designer on board? Of course not, right? Because the other values that designer brings into the table, right? The fact, like, the ability to think critically, the ability to think from a very human-centric perspective. So in a room where there is engineers, there are product managers who are talking business, who are talking technology, somebody has to talk about the user's voice, right? And that
Yeah.
voice is what the designer brings to the table. So I think that discussion becomes very more healthy. And in any product, the sooner you get into that kind of a discussion in the product building process, the better product that comes out of it, I think. So it's very
Okay.
important if you ask. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's definitely very important, but still, for example, let me in my earlier years I worked in computer security domain. So on one side we know the importance of having a security researcher or particular security engineer into the team, but having said that, we also want that our developers should have that basic understanding of security knowledge so that they can avoid buffer overflow attack and those kind of things. Now, taking the same analogy, like if you talk about developers, definitely having a dedicated design engineers is essential. But in my experience of working with VectoScalar and other IT companies, I usually see that the first level is to make the code functional. Whenever there is a business requirement, the first and foremost focus is to make it work. And I think
Absolutely.
70 to 80% effort is put into that aspect only, and then the performance aspect kicks in, that we want to build a scalable system, we want to have a good design and performance is good. Now, so we teach our developers that okay, developers should have the skill of functional, making the code functional and high performance. Now, but how we can make our developers understand that okay, they should have a this basics of design knowledge, that unless
Sure.
we are having a dedicated engineer, but these are the 4 or 5 fundamentals that they should be aware of.
So again, I think there are two things to look at it, right? One is looking at the interface part, and the other is looking at the experience part, right? So, like everybody in the industry talks about UI/UX. I hate to use that term because I don't really believe that it's UI/UX. It's always UI and UX, right? Because both are equally important. When you make developers talk more about functional aspect, what you're emphasizing is more on the UI part, right? You're saying, okay, let's make sure that the product is functional enough, it's thing. But then somebody is using the product, right? So you have to talk about the experience part as well. And when you talk about experience, you are bound to talk about things like, user experience, like, what is the user thinking, or what is the user experiencing when they're using a product, right? Now imagine if you have the most secure system that you have built. It looks okay, but the moment you click submit, it goes through 15 seconds of, like a dead zone, right? Like something's happening, but you're not sure what's happening, right? How would you feel, right? What would you experience? And so forget security. Let's talk about fintech itself, right? And I remember a classic example we used to quote often. If you remember it, there was this phase where a lot of the fintech companies used to use this example that your payment took 2 seconds or your payment took like 0.23 seconds, right?
Yeah.
Now think
Yeah.
about why that thing came out in the picture, right? Because as a user, if your product gave you a lot more animations and a lot more tada 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 and showed you a confirmation after 4 seconds versus giving you an immediate confirmation after, let's say, 0.25 seconds that your confirmation went through, which
Yeah.
scenario would make you feel more comfortable, right? Now, as a developer, I can think about programming for both of the instances. The product will get done, the functional will happen in both the cases. But for a user, that's something which is so different, right? And that basically makes a difference. And I know so many examples of, like, because we were working in fintech, we used to capture these instances from a lot of different fintech companies where, like this thing about how soon your transaction went through became a very interesting way for you to say that, yes, the user is feeling comfortable with my transaction gone through, right? So small things like that, right? When you start to inculcate those kind of thinking into the developers, I think they start to pay attention to what the user will be thinking, what the user will be feeling, and how they're experiencing. And then, accordingly, functional part, I know, like, they will take care of it because, they are engineers, they will take care of it, right? But these things, I think, and that's where when I do a lot of my, corporate trainings, I do a lot of my, design workshops with a lot of, developers, junior folks as well. We try to bring about these points. Like, I know you're great with development, I'm not going to question that, but let's bring these also into development so that the products you build become more functional, but at the same time very emotional and, experience driven as well.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense that UI UX is different, and I think the experience is one word which will trigger. And you gave the example of time, and I think I'm the first hand experience again about the Paytm. Like, you just scan the code and Paytm is done. Ting. I used to hear that kind of sound, and versus when I started using the other platform, I used to count 1, 2, 3, 4, and it was still showing that payment is still processing. I used to tell that vendor, yeah, that yeah, it will take some time. I think it will come. Otherwise, I'll pay you next time. I remember those conversation that you get into a different kind of experience zone while doing that. And before continuing further, let me have pick up one question. So we have Adarsh who is asking, "Hi Kshitij, what role does user feedback play in your design process for impactful tech solutions?"
Yeah, great question. I think I'm a big believer of user feedback. I think user feedback is really essential. The problem that we often do is we take feedback very late in the product building process. So if you can find a way to bring feedback earlier into the process, I think that's really helpful because it allows you to really, make adjustments to your product. And it can be done multiple ways, right? You could have a beta release of a product and get some feedback. You could actually go out in the markets. I used to actually go out in the markets and get like real feedback on my Paytm for Business product because, I wanted to get real feedbacks. I remember traveling all across India, right, from, like Dharamshala to like Goa to like Eastern India to wherever, because every geography had different, different connotations that people start associating with the product, right? And those kind of give you very interesting insights that even though it works well, even if it's a great tech product, why are people not using it, right? What's there in the mind? And many times they won't tell you this in a survey form, right? So you have to go out there. You have to go out there with people. The easiest way to collect feedback is, oh, I'll share a survey form, right? But people lie in survey forms, right? So the best way to get feedback is to have conversation, deep conversations. I think if you make it a practice to get that early in the product building process, I think it's a great thing to have in the company as well.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for giving that input about the talking to people and seeing them how they are using the product instead of just getting a form filled. But
Yeah.
as you also mentioned that we are taking the feedback late in the journey. So even I think doing a beta and then taking the feedback is kind of a late, because you have already built the product, then only you're going to the beta. But you talked about that, how to take the those feedback early in the stages. So would you like to
Yeah, yeah.
share one or two example
Oh,
to
yeah,
take?
absolutely. So,
Yeah.
see, I think, I'm a big believer of low fidelity prototypes. Um, Thankfully, these days, with Figma and with other tools, even your low fidelity prototype looks almost like high fidelity prototypes, right? Like you can, if you have a design system built, you have design libraries ready, you can just, do a lot of drag and drop, auto generate, autopilot. You can, a lot of things get created random automatically. So I think that even before developing a product, even at the design finalization stage or wireframe stage, also you can actually get feedback from people. So when you do, let's say, I'll give you a simple example, right? Let's say you're building wireframes of a product. And wireframes are basically low fidelity prototypes. They show you the functionality, they show you the user flows. If you get feedback at that level, you'll be very clear about people telling you about the functional aspects of a product, right? Saying, okay, this function, this flow will be difficult for me to navigate through, or people will face struggle. So you'll get those impact. If you get feedback on a high fidelity prototype, human psychology is such, or human nature is such, that people will start telling you about colors, right? They'll start oh, this should be better color, right? This blue is not really good, or this red is not really good, or this color, because color over dominates, right? Overpowers our thinking. That's the way human nature is, right? It's human psychology. So the moment you see color, you start to pay attention to the color and you miss out on the functionality part. But if you, let's say,
Okay.
take feedback at a wireframe stage, which is more grayscale and less of the actual thing, you actually get functional feedback as well. Right? So I would suggest at different stages of the process, you can actually be very specific about what feedback you want and why you're collecting that feedback, right? And that, so let's say you do a fully developed product feedback, there you can talk about performance, right? And I remember in back in my organizations, we used to have this design audits, and design audits or like user feedback used to be at different stages as well. So very important.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Kshitiz, for sharing that, and thanks, Adarsh, for your question. I think your question was very helpful. Now, let me take up the next question, which is coming from Simple Setia. Any challenging design project that you led, and also how did you and your team overcome those challenges?
Oh, so this is where I'll probably go a little bit off Paytm, right? I think I've been talking a lot about Paytm work, and of course I've like done a lot of work. One of the projects I can talk about is basically I also run a non-profit organization, right? It's called Happy Horizons Trust, which is basically designed for social impact. The interesting part is there's no tech involved in it, right? Now you could say that you're a tech industry person, but then how do you see design in solving a problem in a design project where there's no tech involved, right? But again, as I said earlier as well, if you understand that there's a problem that needs to be solved, technology should not be the only way you can solve the problem, right? And I think this was a big learning for me because when you are young and you want to start a project and you come from a tech background, having worked in tech companies, studied in tech institutions, you always have a bias towards technology solutions. You'll always think that okay, let's bring in technology into it, right? So we did the same thing, right? We remember we were trying to design a project for a school where we wanted to kind of impact students' learning, and we wanted to increase the time, or we wanted to increase the attention level of students in a classroom. Very simple problem to solve for. The normal convention at that point was okay, let's bring in some like phones and tablets, and let's bring in some multimedia. We'll show people videos, and of course they will enjoy the classroom, then classroom engagement will increase. But fundamentally what we understood was it was not about the technology products that you had, right? It's not about like basically giving them like colorful medium, right? The fundamental problem that was basically that people were not engaging with children, right? So we said, how do you engage? So the design challenge was how do you engage with children? And that engagement basically came from a simple thing like which we all do is by engaging in storytelling sessions, right? And I said, like it's very non-tech, but it's very fundamental to human nature that if I have a storytelling session between a child in class 1, 2, 3 with somebody whom they're comfortable with, because what you have to also understand, our education system is such where children often feel very fearful of the teachers. So we actually said, okay, we'll bring in a set of people who are trained in storytelling, who are trained in engagement with children, in a very non-tech manner, but at a very human to human level. And what we realized was that was phenomenal because children just opened up, right? Because now they didn't have this fear of technology, they didn't have this fear of somebody enforcing learning on them, and something as simple as storytelling sessions became very powerful way for them to engage, right? So the solution was a set of storytelling sessions, and of course on the side we would train people to do that, and then we launched this with almost about 30 schools in Bihar. It was a hit program. But yeah, again, as I said, like it was very challenging initially because we think tech first, but in reality, often like specifically look at impactful space, tech is an enabler, right? So you have to first understand the problem and then of course use technology to enable that.
Yeah, and I think that was a great example that it's not only tech which can solve the problem. When someone is having a design mindset, a problem solving mindset based on the human experience, then they can find other ways also to solve those problems. Thanks, Simple, for asking this question. I hope your question is answered. Let me go to the next question from Aditya Raj, who is asking, what advice would you give to designers looking to create more impactful tech solutions? So it's not technical people creating a more well-designed solution, probably how designers can create more tech-oriented solution.
Yeah, I think thankfully we are in a great time right now where designers and tech actually work together. And I'll tell you right now we are a great time because when I started my careers, it was all like poles apart, right? Like designers and tech
Yeah.
never sat together also, right? We were sitting. I remember my first job was where we were sitting in a pyramid building back in Bangalore in Infosys 2005, where we probably never met developers. We never met tech folks, right? Because we would do a design, hand it over. The BA, the business analyst would be sitting somewhere outside the country. So it was all happening in silos. But the great part today is when you look at product companies where people are actually working together. So you have a great opportunity to collaborate with designers with tech, right? And I think that fundamental collaboration, my only advice is that fundamental collaboration can happen at the very beginning versus saying, okay, let the tech build it, and then I think about design, or vice versa, right? Like, let me design it, and then I will think about technology. So I'll give you a simple example. So right now we are trying to build a tech platform for students in underprivileged geographies to get more exposure, right? Because what we fundamentally believe is that because people don't get the right exposure, their mindsets don't think the way we think, right? So probably there's a way for, if we can give them more exposure, you can probably uh, and that's the reason why, let's say, a student in a Patna or a Bihar would be different than a student in a Bangalore versus a student in the US, because their exposure levels are different, and it's fundamental as that, right? So if you have to build a tech solution which is as fundamental to giving them more exposure, from day one I've been talking to tech partners, right? Because I know that it's a tech product, but if I build the product and then go to tech, the tech will give me so many things that may not work, right? Or if, let's say, the tech guys build it and then I have to bring in my inputs later on, that also may not work, right? So it's important to get work together, and it's important to do it early in the process because that helps to get the most impactful solutions.
Okay, so collaboration is the key. That one has to start that collaboration early as possible, so that we can create a well-designed technical solution, so that we are not missing on any other aspect. Thanks, Aditya, for asking this question. Now, as we are coming towards closure of this tech talk, I got very curious about your impact thing. That definitely you had a great start in IIT, and you worked with great multinationals, but how that passion for impact came into existence, because in all of your current project I see there is a strong taste for and commitment for impact. So how did that start? Was it from beginning, or at some point of time you became more passionate about impact?
Yeah, I think like, I think for me it's more important because like, I have probably, it's because of the area and the geography that I come from, where I feel that there is a need for us to do something about it. I mean, see, you can always crib about the system, you can always say that system doesn't work, and be happy in wherever you are, but crib about the system, right? For me it was more about, I will crib about the system, yes, but then I will also do something about it, right? So whatever I did, whatever I'm doing, it's always a justification to nobody else but to myself, that at least I'm doing something to the question that the system doesn't work, right? So that, like, whenever you, and there are certain things that's very personal to you, I'm not saying that everybody else will have the same way of thinking, But for me, that was the common thing, right? I felt that, I will crib about the system. I will criticize the system because that's what democracy allows you to do so. But then, if someone asks you in return, right, you are cribbing, but what have you done in return? I should have something to talk about, right? So whether it's in education, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in the current financial inclusion space that we are working, there's always something to say that I have something, I've done something. I'm not just talking based off or not doing something. So I think that's a common binding thread, and I think that's something which I think has kind of shaped my identity as a designer, and I think I'll probably continue to live with that for wherever I think.
That's a very inspiring thought, because as I see that for an engineer, it's not just the qualification or the degree that they have gone through, the basic nature of problem solving at the root of it. Similar way, as a designer, one has to have that open mindset that okay, anything can be solved, and there is a different way of doing that thing. So probably you have that strong foundation within yourself that makes you a great designer. And would you like to also share about that impact venture, that investment platform that you have created, that how it came up, and
Sure.
what is the
Sure.
shape that it is taking up right now?
Yeah, so the impact venture is called Kare Ke Ba Ventures, right? Kare Ke Ba. Kare Ke Ba basically is a Bhojpuri phrase, which basically means must do it, right? It's an ode to where we come from. Because what we also realized is, right, like a lot of startup entrepreneurs from, let's say, underserved geographies like, Odisha, West Bengal, UP, Bihar, they have the zeal, they have the fire, but they don't have the support system. They don't have the exposure and the support system, right? And these are the areas which actually require most of the impactful solutions. So we have people, they are working elsewhere. They are working, let's say, the whichever city you may be based out of. But eventually, now you're targeting this as your TAM, right? Your targetable addressable market is basically these areas. So I said there should be more local support for entrepreneurs who are trying to solve these challenging problems. Eventually, of course, they'll grow and grow to pan India and maybe across the world as well. But I think there are a lot of problems to be solved, and I think we kind of work with a lot of some amazing entrepreneurs who are solving some interesting problems. One guy is working in, let's say, emergency healthcare services. Somebody is working in how do you create better opportunities for like blue collar jobs for people, and then some very interesting if you go through our portfolio company as well. But I think that's something which it's a fundamental to what myself, my other co-founder, and the other founding LPs believe in fundamentally. That yes, we have got the exposure. It's a way for us to give back to the society as well. But obviously, not everybody is interested in charity work. So this is like a way for us to say, okay, let's invest in entrepreneurs. Let's give our time and our financial help to entrepreneurs who can really benefit from this. And we've been around for almost like 2.5 years now, and and hopefully we can grow that a lot more in the coming days as well.
And that's again very inspiring, that how the solutioning mindset is in the action mode, that first you are building your own solution, and then you see that it's not just my work. Probably there are other entrepreneurs as well who need just mentoring or some support system, so that they can
Absolutely.
also start solving the problem. And the word itself, I think when I pronounce that word, I thought it's some other western, some terms or something from Nigeria, the kare keba. I think that's what I pronounce it, but kare keba. Now I can relate more to that phrase, and I think it's altogether very beautiful system, Kshitiz. And thanks for taking out time for the audience. His contact details, his LinkedIn profile in the chat box below, so you can see that scrolling down below. You can connect with him, and definitely you should connect with him. Send him some messages so that you see how things are happening into the space of design and tech, and how it is impacting the world. Definitely, besides our full day job or full day work that we are doing, everyone should be involved at least 1 or 2 hours on a weekly basis to some impact driven world, so that we can give back to the society in the right manner. It's not just the donation part that we see, okay, going to temples and doing the donation is one thing, but there are other ways of also contributing to the world. Thanks, Satish. Any last message for our audience before we close down for today?
No, thank you so much. It was really wonderful to be here on the show, and I think I just feel that like I just have one kind of request, right? That definitely everybody should become an entrepreneur, and we want more people to solve problems, but do have impact in your mind and purpose in your mind, because what also happens is like a lot of people later. I get a lot of requests from people like mid into the careers who find that purpose missing in their careers, right? They're like, we have made the money, we have done some, visited places, been in companies, but the purpose is missing. So I think, when you're young, when people are young, it's a great time to have that purpose aligned in your work. So that way you always find, of course, you'll find the passion, you'll find the money, you'll find the networks, but you'll also find purpose in your work. And I think that's that meaning in the work is something which a lot of people are missing these days. I think it's a great way for you to keep that in mind and just be mindful of it. And if I can be of any help anytime, anybody, I'm always welcome. You can always connect with me, and I'm happy to share and guide whenever possible as well.
Thank you, Kshitiz. And we have also accrued coming from Simple Setia. Thanks, Kshitiz, for an insightful session. And I'm sure people who are watching and going to watch this session in future as well will in sync with that thought process. Keep writing, keep sharing your thought process. How did you like the session? Do connect with Kshitiz and do something impactful, right? About thing that how his talk inspired you and how you took the action. I think as a change maker, that's one thing that inspires you the most. When you see people coming into action based on your work, I think that's a big thing that can happen. With that, thanks to all, thanks to Kshitiz, and thanks to all the viewers who are watching this show for keep connecting again and again. And VectoScalar Tech Talk show. We'll connect again next week with another amazing guest. Till then, keep growing, keep learning. Have a nice day ahead. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.